Hey guys, tonight we begin with the soft clatter of coal wagons on cobblestone, and the slow rise of soot curling into a pale gray dawn. The city hasn't quite woken, but it's never truly slept. Somewhere, a kettle hums over a sputtering flame, and somewhere else, a child is already coughing. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. Let me know where you're tuning in from. What time is it where you are? This isn't the London of lace gloves and opera glasses. It's not the one with carriages and tea at 4. No, the London we're stepping into tonight is made of smoke and skin, of damp wool and cracked boots. It is cold where it shouldn't be, and loud where it needs silence. You're not a guest in a grand townhouse. You're someone else entirely. Someone with straw in their sleeves and soot in their breath. You live in the back alleys, the rented rooms, the corners where heat hides. And every morning starts the same, not with sunlight, but with breath. Visible in the air, and a roof that leaks when it remembers to. Your life is not carved in stone or etched in books. It's lived between the floorboards. In a bowl of porridge, a flickering fire, a coat patched too many times. There is beauty. Here, but it's a shy kind. It peeks out in kindness and fades with the fog dot. So tonight, we'll walk slowly through that world together. Not to pity it, not to fear it, but to notice it. To feel what it meant to survive behind closed doors when warmth was luck and silence. Was gold dot, and that brings us to the beginning. To a space smaller than a carriage, colder than the streets outside. A room with no window dot. It was a kind of darkness that didn't wait for nightfall, the kind that greeted you at waking. That lived in the corners of a room built without eyes. No glass, no panes, no sun. Just 4 walls stitched from rot and brick, trapping the night inside. Long after the rest of the city had begun to glow with morning, you'd wake not from light, but from habit, from a cough down the hall, or the creak of a bed frame that was not your own. Maybe from the thin clink of coal dropped into a metal pail 2 floors below, or from the soft groan of the ceiling beams shifting with the damp. You'd lie there for a moment, wrapped in wool that smelled faintly of mildew and burnt lard, thinking of nothing. Or maybe thinking of tea. Not the taste of it, just the heat. There's no window here to check the weather, but you don't need one. The chill has a way of coming through anyhow, breathing beneath the door, and curling up your sleeves like a secret. The walls, if you could call them that, were soft in places. Not with fabric, but with damp. If you leaned your hand there too long, it came away wet. But no one said that aloud. Damp walls were better than no walls. And no walls meant wind dot, you rise carefully. The boards creak like old knees. And as your foot meets the cold floor, the day begins. Not with ceremony, not with prayer, but with the gentle curse of cold on bare skin. There are 3 others in the room. A sister, perhaps, a child, someone else whose name you didn't catch. But who shares your air, your bread, your silence? No one speaks. There's no need. Words are wasted on mornings like this dot in the corner, a tiny stove. Bent and rusted, but beloved, because it holds the memory of heat, if not the reality. Beside it, yesterday's coal, what's left of it, tucked into a soot-dark tin. Enough for 5 minutes of fire, maybe 6. You light it anyway, even if only to pretend, even if only to let the smoke remind the room what warmth used to feel like. The flame costs to life, more blue than gold, and you hold your hands to it like a prayer. The air begins to shift. Not warm, not yet, but less cruel. The chill pulls back just a little, like a blanket being slowly unfolded. A single candle is lit, and the room, for the first time today, begins to believe in light. There's no mirror here. You've never needed one. Your fingers run through your hair, tug it back, Tie it if there's string. Your shirt still smells of last week's broth. But that's comfort, not shame. You reach for bread, not fresh, it never is. It's the kind that scratches the roof of your mouth and takes twice as long to chew. But it fills the silence like nothing else can. And besides, it's not the taste you crave. It's the motion, the ritual, the doing of something that others might call breakfast. A neighbor stomps above. Dust falls gently from the ceiling. You shake it from your sleeve without thought. It's just part of the air here, like soot, like shared breath, like the faint rustle of the mice beneath the floorboards, who have lived here longer than any of you. The room may be dark, but it sees everything. It sees you tuck the blanket around the child, still asleep by the wall. It sees the way you check the pot for water and find only yesterday's drips, cloudy with ash. It sees your fingers hesitate before dipping in, and it forgives you, because here small things matter. A heel of bread, a pinch of salt, a borrowed scarf that still smells of someone else's soap. These are the treasures of the room with no window. It hears. It hears the soft cough of a neighbor through the bricks, the rush of a cart outside, too fast, too loud, and the shout that follows it. It hears your bones creak when you stretch, and the gentle sigh you let out when you sit again, knees against your chest, and feel the fire begin to die. There are no clocks here. Time is kept in warmth, in light, in the rise and fall of others' breath. You do not own the morning. You borrow it. Just like everything else. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to see the sky from your bed, to open your eyes and be met with blue or even gray, to watch a bird pass or the bare branches of a tree twitching in the wind. But windows are for the wealthy, or at least for those who live closer to the street than to the sewers. You live in what used to be storage, or maybe something even less. A space claimed not because it was safe, but because it was yours. Because the door shuts, and the walls hold, and the rent is low enough to forget your name. And still, you dress. You tie your boots. You wet your hands and smooth your sleeves. You nod toward the others. And when you open the door, the darkness stays behind, because the day has begun, and you are ready. Not rested, not warm, not whole. But ready. And that brings us to the world outside that door, where the cold doesn't wait for permission, where water freezes in the basins, where this air bites and the soap stings, where to be clean is to be brave. The door opens and the air greets you like a slap. Not cruel, just honest. London in the early hours doesn't pretend to be kind. The cold isn't hiding in the shadows. It's waiting right there in the open, damp, unblinking, and already settling into the threadbare cuffs of your coat. Outside, a mist clings low to the street. Not fogged exactly, just the kind of wet that makes everything look blurry. Chimneys have started to breathe, but not yours. You walk past them slowly, footsteps quiet, boots still stiff from the frost they held. Overnight, cleanliness is a strange thing here. Not a routine, not a certainty. A kind of luxury, or worse, a risk. Because water is not just scarce, it's cold. Deeper than cold. It bites. It burns. It turns fingers raw and makes the bones beneath them ache. And in homes like yours, homes without plumbing, without baths, without faucets or basins, to bathe is to suffer on purpose. The basin is a tin bowl, shallow, dented. You pour in what you've managed to warm, which isn't much. 2 cups of boiled water, chased by 4 cups of cold. Enough to dip a rag, not enough to feel indulgent. There are rules, unspoken but firm. First, the face. Then, the armpits. Then, if you're brave, the feet. You don't strip. There's no need. You wash what's visible, what matters. What might be seen or sniffed? What might give you away? And always in silence. Because there's something private about it. Not shame, exactly, but modesty sharpened by survival. You scrub quietly, sleeves rolled up, steam curling from the rag like breath from a tired animal. Soap comes from a sliver, too small to grip, too stubborn to melt. It smells of lye and tallow, and something bitter you can't quite name. Not floral, not clean, just sharp, but it cuts through grease, and that's enough. You remember once, maybe a holiday, maybe a miracle. You had a proper bath, a full one, water up to your ribs. You sat so long you forgot how cold felt. But that was then. Now, the idea of sinking into a tub feels like fantasy. Or punishment out behind the house. Someone's dumped a chamber pot. The steam rising from it is almost beautiful if you let your eyes unfocus. There's always steam in this part of the city, from mouths, from cracks in walls, from gutters that have never been cleaned. It paints the morning like smoke from a dream that hasn't ended well. Laundry, when done, is a group effort. The wash tub is shared, the soap passed hand to hand. You pound the fabric with fists when you're desperate. Stomp it when you're cold. Scrub it against wood until your knuckles match the stains. And still, it never smells quite clean. Drying clothes is a puzzle. Indoors, the damp lingers and molds. Outdoors, the soot settles before the sun does. You pin them anyway, to railings, to ropes, to anything that can hold. And you pray the wind is strong enough to dry, but not enough to steal. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below and subscribe if you'd like more nights like this. Children are the bravest when it comes to washing. You'd think they'd protest, but often they laugh, splash, shiver, and shriek in delight, not because they enjoy it, but because they know no other way. A tin bath in the kitchen is not strange to them. It is life, and life, when you're small, is made of whatever is in front of you. And yet, despite all this, people try. They iron, they starch, they brush mud from hems and lint from sleeves. They shine shoes that will never be new again. Because dignity is not measured in cost. It's measured in care. And to care about being clean, even when you're not, is a kind of rebellion. You pass a woman on the stairwell. Her hair is damp. She's combed it straight and tied it in a ribbon that's fraying at the edges. She smells of coal smoke and rosemary. You nod. She nods. And that's it. That's everything. At the pump. The line has already begun. A rusted handle, a chipped spout, and a puddle at its base that never drains. Each person holds a bucket, a kettle, a jug. They speak quietly, or not at all. There's no need to explain what they're waiting for. The water tastes of iron, of stone, of something old and unsure. But it boils if you're patient. And boiled water becomes tea. And tea, even bitter and black and barely warm, is something worth waking for. On rare days, the bathhouse is open. For a penny, a tin token, or a favor owed, you step inside. The air smells of steam and strangers. Bodies lined like spoons in a drawer. Laughter here is nervous, eyes kept low. And when you step into the warmth, you nearly cry. Not because it's hot, but because it's quiet. It's the only place in London where you can hear your own breath echo. But when you leave, wrapped in still damp cloth, stepping back into the smoke and the mud, it's hard not to wonder, how long will it last? An hour? A minute? Until the next passing cart throws muck on your legs? So you walk carefully, proudly, as if each step deserves to stay clean. And that's the thing no one tells you. It's not that people don't wash because they're lazy or don't care. It's because to be clean in a place like this is to fight every hour to stay that way. To dry your hands before the wind undoes the work. To straighten your collar before the fog soaks it again. To stand still for just one moment and feel the warmth of your own skin as it was meant to be. And that brings us to the next hour. The stomach begins to stir. A low ache. A familiar emptiness. The kind that's not loud, but heavy. So we search the city, quietly, for something to eat. Hunger doesn't shout first thing in the morning. It whispers. A low, familiar ache that curls itself under your ribs and waits politely. It doesn't demand, not yet. It simply makes. It's self-known, like a guest who's arrived early and taken a seat at the table, though there's nothing to serve. The morning stomach is not dramatic. It doesn't grumble or growl, like they say in books. It sinks. It stretches. It fills you with a hollowness that feels heavier than fullness ever did. It reminds you gently that it's been a while. There's food in London. Of course there is, but not always here. Not always now. You check the tin on the shelf. A few crumbs of bread crust. Yesterday's heel, hard as slate. You hold it in your palm and feel its weight, light but not worthless. You break it in two. One half goes to the child, still dozing near the stove. The other, you chew slowly. Not because you want to savor it, but because chewing makes you feel like you're doing something. Outside, the city smells like fried fat. And ash. A cruel combination. The tease of cooking drifting from windows you don't belong to. A corner shop has opened its shutters, and a pot of porridge simmers just inside. It costs a penny. You have none. But you walk by anyway, pretending you've already eaten. There's a rhythm to this part of the day. People walk with purpose, but not too fast. They're hungry too. And hunger slows the feet. Children trail behind mothers, faces still soft with sleep, eyes scanning the ground for anything edible. An apple core not fully eaten, a bit of bruised potato fallen from. A cart. A pigeon feather, chewed and spit out. Something, anything, that says, not yet. Don't give up yet. There's a boy at the bakery who sometimes gives away the ends. The bit's too stale to sell. You nod when you see him. He doesn't nod back, but he leaves something on the barrel outside. And when he turns away, you take it. It's still warm in the center. Just barely. Once, someone handed you a boiled egg. Just like that. No words, no smile. Just the motion of a hand offering something fragile. You'd forgotten how sweet eggshells smelled when cracked open. You ate it too quickly and felt dizzy after, but it was a good dizzy. A full one. The market's not far. It wakes up slowly, like everything else here. Vendors stacking crates, dusting off tables, laying out bruised turnips and tired fish. Nothing's fresh, but it's food. You walk through the rows, breathing in the salt and earth and rot. It's not disgusting, it's familiar. Sometimes. You're lucky enough to trade a stitched hem, a few buttons resewn, a chore run, a message carried, all in exchange for something soft, a potato, a cabbage leaf, a rind of cheese. And when the luck is especially kind, a bit of butter too. Melt on it. The fire at home is nearly out by now. But if you walk fast and cup your hands just right, you can carry the ember in a tin lid, sheltering it from the wind like a newborn. You feed it scraps of coal and whisper encouragements. Just a little longer. Not yet. Stay with. You boil water with care. Not just for tea, though tea would be a gift, but for warmth. To steam the bits of green you manage to scrape together. To soften the root vegetable that shouldn't even be called food anymore, but will be because it has to be. And then you sit with a chipped bowl in your lap, one spoon, maybe two. The taste doesn't matter. It's hot, and that's something. You blow on it slowly, as if the longer it takes to cool, the more you'll have. And maybe that's true. Maybe slowness is. A kind of survival too. There's no table here. Just laps and knees and the floor. But people gather anyway. Eating together not because it's a ritual, but because hunger is quieter when shared. Someone makes a joke. You don't catch it, but you laugh. Because it feels good to laugh with a mouth that just swallowed something. Because it reminds your stomach that it's not alone, that you're here, that you're trying. Evening meals are further away than they seem, but morning meals are more honest. They ask less. They offer just enough. They don't pretend to be feasts. They just say, "You're still here. So let's begin again." You fold the napkin, not a real napkin, just a strip of cloth that once was something else. You rinse the bowl with hot water if you have it. If not, you wipe it with bread. Then you sit again, not to rest, but to breathe, because the ache is quieter now, not gone, but softened, like a bell in the distance that stopped ringing but still echoes in the chest dot, and in that moment, you remember what it is to be full. Not with food, maybe, but with motion, with company. With a few good bites of something hot dot, the stomach still murmurs. But it thanks you dot, and that brings us onward, to the roads that wait outside, to boots still wet with yesterday's rain, to streets where the mud never dries, to a city that speaks to the solace of your feet. And so we walk, into the muck and the murmur, and the day ahead. You step outside, and London greets you with the sound of squelch dot, not thunder, not bells, just the soft, deliberate kiss of your boots sinking into the city's skin. It's not quite mud. It's thicker than that, more stubborn. A stew of soot and horse droppings, rainwater and refuse, soaked paper and yesterday's tea leaves. A strange sort of carpet laid out across every road, and everyone walks it the same. There's no avoiding it. Not really. The wooden walkways, where they exist, are already taken, crowded with better shoes and quicker steps. You walk on the edge, between slop and stone, one foot always testing the next patch. Like crossing a shallow river made of soup. The boots aren't yours. Not originally. Someone wore them before you. Maybe 2 or 3 someones. They're cracked at the heel, soft at the toe, and squeak when you flex. But they still hold out the worst of the wet. Not perfectly. Just enough. Boots matter more than most things here. More than hats. More than gloves. They carry you, protect you, fail you. They're not a fashion. They're a lifeline. They're the only reason your skin hasn't split open from the cold. Yet, the street is alive with motion. Wheels grind through the muck, spraying it sideways like angry paint. A man slips on a pile of something unnameable, and no one laughs, because it happens to everyone. Because it could be you. Children walk barefoot sometimes. Not always by choice. They hop from cobblestone to crate, feet red and raw, leaving tiny prints in the grime behind them. One boy holds his shoes in his hands, not because it's better, but because the soles have come off, and he's pretending they haven't. The sky is white, but not bright. The kind of white that promises nothing. A dull, patient sheet of cloud that stretches from chimney to chimney. Rain may come again. Or not. You walk anyway. You must. A woman in front of you stops to lift her skirt above the mess, revealing legs wrapped in linen and patched stockings. She meets your eyes, not with shame, but with something closer to fatigue. Like she's been lifting this skirter. Whole life. You nod. She nods. You both walk on. In places, the road dips deeper, forming black pools with soft green centers. They bubble when stepped in. Sometimes they hide holes. Sometimes they swallow boots whole. You learn to read the ripples, to spot the oil shine and steer wide. The smell isn't strong, but it's constant. A warm metallic funk. The scent of things left too long, of rot that's been swept aside, but never truly removed. It clings to your coat, your scarf, the inside of your mouth. You don't gag. You don't even blink anymore. This is just the city's perfume. You pass a man cleaning muck from the cracks in the stone with a bent broom. Not a street sweeper, just someone trying to keep the worst of it from crawling into his shop. He hums while he works. A hymn, maybe, or something older, something quieter. A boot seller shouts from under an awning. Leather, stitched tight, rainproof. His voice cuts through the damp like chalk on slate. You don't stop. His boots aren't for you. Someone throws slop from a second-story window. You hear it before you feel it. The wet slap of old stew against the ground, too close to your feet. You don't flinch. You just keep walking, because this is London. And London sticks to you. You find dry ground briefly near a bakery's threshold. A patch of brick still warm from the oven behind it. You pause there, shake your boot. Watch a thick clump of something fall away like the city shedding a scab. A little girl skips past, singing softly to herself. Her boots are mismatched. One brown, one black, but both are tied with twine and proud. She doesn't look down. She doesn't need to. She knows where to step. There's a man sitting against the wall, shoes off, socks steaming in the cold. He wrings them out slowly, as if milking them of the morning's sorrow. He doesn't speak, but when your eyes meet, he nods once, as if to say, still here, still standing. And that's the thing about boots in this city. They're not just footwear. They're the map you walk on, the shield you hope holds, the quiet testimony that says, I've made it this far. The mud never goes away. It just moves. From the street to your soles. From your soles to your floor. From your floor to your dreams. Sometimes you smell it in your sleep. Sometimes it is your sleep. You come home later that day and peel the boots off like a second skin. They sigh when they're freed, and so do you. You place them near the stove, not too close, just enough to pretend they'll be dry by morning. You take a rag to them, not to shine, but to remove the worst, to give them a little dignity. You wipe slowly, each stroke an apology, an offering, a thank you, because these boots are tired, and so are you, but you'll both go out again tomorrow, because the city will still be waiting, and it will still be wet, and you will still need to walk. And so, with sore feet and softened silence, we turn toward what comes next. A job that doesn't care about hunger. A shift that starts before your boots finish drying. A world where work waits for no one. And so we follow. The weary into labor. The day hasn't begun, not really, but the work is. It begins before the sun lifts its head. Before the warmth wakes. Before the stomach is full. Before the boots are dry. Before the soul is ready. But ready or not, you rise, because there's a foreman who won't wait. Because there's a clock that doesn't care. You walk the same road you always walk. Past the grocer, past the smithy, past the boy who sells firewood by the bundle. Each step feels slower. Today, each bone a little heavier. The city doesn't notice. It never does. It keeps moving. So you move with it. The factory gates creak open with a groan that feels human. Like even the building is tired. Inside. It's warmer, barely. Warm with breath, with bodies, with steam that lingers in the rafters. But not with comfort. Not with kindness. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below, and subscribe if you'd like more nights like this. The machines speak first. Their rhythm is steady, relentless, like a metronome that never stops ticking. They clatter, and hiss and shake like they're angry to be awake. And you move between them, part of the motion now. Less a person, more a piece, The hands do what they remember. Tie, pull, press, stamp. The muscles know the dance. The brain doesn't have to. In fact, it's better if it doesn't. Thinking slows you down. Feeling slows you down. Best to become small, quick, invisible. There are no windows here. Not because they forgot, but because they chose. Light is a luxury, and distraction is danger. The girl beside you sneezes once, twice, and doesn't stop moving. She can't. No one can. The floor is stained with oil and old blood. A nail pokes from a plank, painted over 100 times, but never pulled. It catches the hem of your skirt. You don't cry out. You don't even curse. You just keep moving. The foreman walks the line. His boots are polished. His eyes are not. He doesn't speak unless you're slow. And when he speaks, it cuts like cold metal. You count hours by the aches, by the shifts in light under the door, by the number of buckets filled with lint and scrap, by the songs people hum under their breath to stay awake. Sometimes you imagine you're somewhere else, that the noise is a storm, that the tremble in your fingers is the wind, that the heat on your neck is the sun, not the sweat of others. Breaks are brief. You crouch beside a beam and sip something from a tin. Tea, if you're lucky. Water, if not. You chew bread if you have it. If not, you chew nothing. Just to keep your jaw moving. Just to feel human. There's a boy who works the press. No. Older than 10. His shirt is too big. His shoes don't match. But his hands are fast. Too fast. He slips once. A yelp. The machine pauses, not for him, for itself. Then it starts again. Someone wraps his hand. He cries without noise. The foreman watches, then nods, and walks on. You return to your place. The work waits for no one, and yet you find rhythm. Peace, not joy, but rhythm. And that rhythm is something. It keeps you breathing. It keeps you upright. It keeps your hands from shaking when the world around you does. Hours pass. You smell dinner from the street outside. Meat, pies, roasted chestnuts, things you won't have. But still, the scent reaches you. And for a moment, it softens something. The bell rings, not a song, but a command. Time to stop. Time to leave. Time to begin the rest of the day. Because work doesn't end when the shift does. It just changes shape. You leave with your hands sore and your back bent, but still walking, still breathing, still something. The sky is darker now. The clouds lower, the air colder, but your boots are warm from the floorboards. Your fingers still hum with effort. Your breath fogs the air like incense. You look down and realize you made it through. Another day, another shift, another step in a life that doesn't ask for applause. And that brings us to what lies beneath all that labor. Not just the tired feet, not just the bent backs, but the smallest shoulders of all. The ones who worked before they were grown. The ones who vanished before they were missed. The children who disappeared into the cracks. They were everywhere once. And yet, they were rarely seen. Small feet on wet stone. Soft hands in coarse gloves. Eyes wide enough to hold wonder, but squinted from smoke too early. The children of Victorian London didn't disappear all at once. They faded, slowly, gently, into corners, into chimneys, into silence. They were not taken. They were absorbed. The city didn't swallow them. Violently. It simply opened its arms and asked for help. And the children? They said yes. There was no age for beginning. No moment when a child became a worker. It was just a morning like any other, when the door didn't close behind them for school, but for labor. When the toy was replaced with a tool. When the game was a task. When play had a price. A chimney boy wakes before light. No alarm, just habit. just hunger. He wipes the soot from his eyes before he even opens them. His limbs are lean, not from strength, but from stretch. Because the smaller he is, the better he fits. The ropes are coarse. The brush is heavier than he is, but he smiles. Just enough to fool himself. Not because he enjoys it, but because. Smiling uses less energy than crying got. He climbs, slow and steady, into the flue. The walls press close. He holds his breath, pushes up with knees and elbows. The soot falls into his mouth. His throat tightens, but he keeps going, because the man below said to, because he's done it before, because there's coin in it, because. If he's fast, there might be breakfast. Elsewhere, in a matchstick factory, a girl dips splints in white phosphorus. Her fingers are yellowed. Her nails are gone. She sings under her breath, a nursery rhyme, twisted by time. One about fires and roses. She doesn't look up. She can't. Her eyes sting from the fumes. But her hands move like memory, precise, practiced, patient. Her jaw aches, always aches. A dull throb she's learned to ignore. She knows others who lost more than teeth. But she's still here, still singing, still dipping stick after stick. After stick. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video, and consider subscribing only if it feels right. There are children in mills. Tiny bodies darting between cogs. Fast hands fixing threads, retrieving fallen bolts, feeding the machines their next bite. They don't talk. They don't play. They move. Because movement is survival. And there are children who sell flowers, and newspapers, and needles. Children who shine shoes, who hold their caps out with the kind of desperation no child should wear on their face. Children who sleep where the gaslights flicker, wrapped in old curtains, counting rats like stars. Vanish not because no one sees them, but because everyone sees them too much. They are part of the scenery, part of the steam. Too common to notice, too necessary to mourn. In workhouses, they are lined up rows of quiet mouths, learning discipline through hunger. A ladle of porridge, a pat on the shoulder, a name shouted, a task given. You there, sweep, you there, stitch, and always. Yes, sir. No, sir. Thank you, sir. Some never make it past 12. Their lungs don't last. Their backs bend too soon. They get sick, and when they do, there is no time to be sick. So they keep working, and one day they simply stop. No plaque, no grave, no silence observed. Just another shift covered by someone smaller. But still, in the quietest corners, childhood fights to stay. There's a boy who draws with coal on a wall. A bird, a cloud, a crooked sun. He's scolded for it, but he does it anyway. Because art is not a luxury, it's a protest. There's a girl who braids her friend's hair before the bell. Each loop an act of care. A gesture that says, I see. You matter. They whisper jokes in lines. They hum lullabies their mothers once sang. They kick pebbles when no one's watching. They may be workers, but they are also still children. And in those moments, brief as breath, you can see it, the shimmer of who they might have been. The city does not keep records of their laughter, but if you listen closely, you can hear it. In the alleys, in the chimneys, in the soot-streaked smudges left on walls, long scrubbed clean. They didn't all vanish. Some grew up, some left, some told their stories. Some forgot them, but the shape of their lives remains, pressed into the bones of the buildings, stitched into the seams of the cobblestones, written in the steam on a window that no longer exists. It brings us to what comfort looked like, not in stories or bedtime poems, but in public houses filled with breath and beer. To a pint of warmth and the illusion of rest. It wasn't about the beer, Not really Dot, it was about the room. The smell, the noise that wasn't shouting, the warmth that didn't come from fire, but from people breathing in the same space, heavily, slowly, safely. The pub was a kind of chapel, not sacred, but consistent, not holy, but honest. It knew your name, or at least pretended to. And even if no one greeted you, even if no one spoke, just walking through the door was a kind of permission to pause. The floor was sticky. Always. Not from neglect, but from living. Beer soaked into the wood like memory. Boot prints stamped in time. Crumbs of bread, curls of tobacco, the occasional tooth left behind. You didn't come for elegance? You came for heat, Dot, because in Victorian London, most homes didn't have stoves. Or if they did, they were too expensive to light. Fire took coal, and coal cost. But the pub already burned. It burned every night. The seats were low and warm. Cushions if you were lucky. Just benches if you weren't. But after a day of smoke and steam, after a shift spent bent over bolts or boards, anything horizontal was a blessing. And the beer? Warm, because the pipes were warm. Because the cellars weren't cold. Because no one could afford to wait, Dot. It was bitter on the tongue. Flat, sometimes. Poured with a heavy hand and little ceremony. But it filled the belly like broth. And after 3 sips, you stopped caring what it tasted like. What mattered was the mug. That you were holding something. That it was full. That it was yours. A man might sit beside you and not speak for an hour. Not out of rudeness, but because nothing needed saying. The silence of the pub was different from the silence of the street. It was softer, safer. You might nod. He might nod back. And that was a conversation. Some nights there was music. A fiddler by the fire. A woman with a cracked voice singing old songs about rivers and roses and lost sailors. No one clapped. Not because they didn't care, but because clapping felt too loud. They just listened. Or didn't. Either way, the song stayed in the room like smoke. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below and subscribe if you'd like more. Nights like this, a boy might sneak under tables, collecting mugs. Too young to drink, too old to be idle. He wore a rag for an apron and kept one eye on the barkeep. If he worked fast, he got soup. If he worked slow, he got nothing. There were rules, unwritten but firm. Don't ask questions about bruises. Don't count coins aloud. Don't drink faster than you can stand. The barkeep watched everything, with one eye for trouble and the other for opportunity. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it meant you could trust the pie. Yes, there was food. Sort of. Pies with crusts thicker than their fillings. Eggs boiled into rubber. Sausage. Rolls that defied logic and often digestion. But again, it wasn't about the food, Dot. It was about something warm, the hearth. No one knew whose it was. No one asked. It had a place. And so did you. That's what mattered. Not the beer. Not the song. Not the seat, or the stew, or the sting of the first sip, Dot. It was that, for an hour or two, you weren't surviving. You were just sitting, just existing. The world didn't ask anything of you in the pub. You'd already paid your due. In sweat. In coin. In silence. You didn't have to smile, but you could. You didn't have to cry. But if you did, no one asked why. And when it was time to go, when the mug was empty, when the fire dipped low, when the barkeep started stacking chairs just loud enough for everyone to hear, you rose slowly, a little steadier, a little warmer, maybe. Not full, but fed, Dot, maybe not happy, but less hollow. And you'd step out again, into the night, Dot, into the cold, into the city that waits just beyond the glow, Dot. And that brings us to those who knew cleanliness best, not because they were served, but because they did the serving. those who scrubbed and scraped and carried the filth away. Cleanliness was a performance, not for health, not for pride, but for the eyes of others. The polished boot, the stiff white apron, the fresh soap smell, they all told a story. A story most Londoners couldn't afford to believe in, because behind every starched collar, someone was scrubbing the stains that wouldn't come out. This chapter isn't about those who were clean. It's about those who made things clean while staying dirty themselves. The laundress rose before dawn, not because she wanted to, but because linen doesn't wait, because someone's sheets were waiting in a basket soaked through with other people's sweat. Her hands were already cracked when she dipped them into the first pail. Water gray with ash and lye, clothes soaked in it like secrets. She didn't flinch. Pain was just part of the process. The scrub board was a rhythm. Back and forth, cloth against wood, until the stains gave up, or she did. Fingers numb, shoulders tight, back bowed like a hook. Some said the clothes came out white. She knew better. They came out paler than before. And sometimes that was enough. She'd rinse them in 3 waters, sometimes 2, depending on the time, the light, the mood of the sky. Then twist. Twist until her knuckles popped and her elbows groaned, until water ran in rivulets down her forearms, soaking her apron. If she was lucky, the sun would be out. If not, the lines hung indoors, steam curling off sleeves like ghosts. She never owned what she washed, but she knew it better than its owner did, where the seams were weak, where the wine had spilled, where the perfume still clung like memory dot. She carried a bucket through the alleys, clean clothes folded like letters, not thanked, not seen, just expected dot. And when the day ended, she returned to her own bed, blankets damp, her own clothes untouched, her own laundry undone. Elsewhere, a boy emptied chamber pots, a night soil man in training, too young for the work, but old enough to carry the stench. He'd learned to breathe through his mouth. 2. Look away, to hold the wooden handle tight so it didn't slosh. The pay was poor, but steadier than most. And in the dark, no one could see him. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. There were bathhouse workers too. Boys who fetched water and poured it over the backs of strangers. Girls who swept the floors between soaks. Men who checked the locks on the cubicles and knocked softly when time ran out. They never soaked. They never rested. They watched others enjoy what they provided. Warmth, privacy, the illusion of ease. And still, they worked. Because if they didn't, no one else would in the grand houses. Maids moved like shadows. Polishing silver they'd never touch. Cleaning fireplaces that weren't theirs. Folding dresses with hands stained from scrubbing. They weren't supposed to be noticed. That was the point. To appear only when needed. To vanish when done. To be spotless in appearance. But never given the time to bathe. And yet they cared. Not for praise. Not for dignity. But because doing something well, even in silence, even unseen, still meant something. They had tricks, these cleaners. Red for scrubbing wallpaper, lemon peel for brass, urine for linen, vinegar for windows, spit for stubborn. Spots. Their science was unwritten, but passed down like scripture. Whispered over buckets. Taught by doing. Hands became tools. Nails worn short. Skin calloused to the shape of the work. And when the cloth was clean, they'd nod to themselves. Not proud, but finished. That was its own kind of reward. You see, in a city like this, where dirt was everywhere, where soot kissed your windows goodnight, and rain made everything worse, being clean was a kind of rebellion. And keeping others clean? That was a kind of grace. They held the line between filth and civility. Not because anyone thanked them, but because someone had to, because the curtains had to be drawn, the cups had to shine, the dress had to dazzle, and the waist had to go somewhere always somewhere so they swept and scraped and washed and wrung. And when the bells rang, or the doors closed, or the morning came too soon, they did it all again, not for glory, not for gold, but because the city expected it. And they delivered. And that brings us to what lingers in the air. Not the steam, or the smoke, or the scent of soap, but something heavier, older, quieter, the whisper of disease. Hunger does strange things, not just to the body, to the spirit. It doesn't always make you desperate. Sometimes it makes you soft. A kind of gentleness grows when there isn't quite enough, because you know what it feels like to want. And so, you learn not to take more than your share. It begins in the morning, when you open the cupboard and find little. A crust of bread, a potato with more eyes than skin, an onion too small to bother slicing. You turn each one in your hand like a prayer, and then you make choices, careful ones. You cut slowly. You stretch broth with water. You divide what could never be enough, and somehow it is. There's an art to rationing that has nothing to do with math. It's about memory. Who ate last? Who's still coughing? Who said they weren't hungry, but looked longingly at the pan. It's about listening, watching, giving up your portion without needing to be asked. You say, "I'm not hungry," with a smile. And the person across from you says, "You're lying." But they take it anyway, because they need it. And you let them. Because that's what hunger teaches you, how to care quietly. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only. If it feels right. In the streets, the vendors' calls are almost music. Roasted chestnuts, day-old pies, meat that's more gristle than flesh, but still sizzles with hope. The smells fill your lungs more than your stomach. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you let the scent linger on your coat, just so you can smell it again later, like perfume for the poor. There are tricks, of course. Swallowing slowly, drinking water before meals, chewing longer so your belly feels fooled. And then there's sharing. You share everything, even scraps, half an apple, the corner of a biscuit, the last spoonful of stew. Not because it's plenty, but because it's all you have. And to keep it would feel wrong. Children learn early to break their bread in two, to offer bites to smaller mouths, to stir pots they won't get to taste from. You'd think hunger would make people bitter, but sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes it makes you grateful for every crumb, for every soft bite that doesn't scrape the roof of your mouth, for every warm sip that coats your insides like kindness. And grateful people are often kind. There's a woman who gives away soup every Sunday. She doesn't have much, just carrots and cabbage and whatever's too soft for selling. But she stands with her ladle in her chipped tin pot and serves each bowl like it matters. There's a boy who trades buttons for biscuits. Not good buttons, just shiny ones. The kind people like to turn over in their hands. The baker always takes them. No one knows why. Maybe because he remembers being hungry once too. Even in the workhouses, gray, grim, and silence, someone always gave the smaller child the thicker slice. No one said anything. But it happened. And that was enough, because hunger makes you notice things. The weight of a spoon, the warmth of a cup passed hand to hand, the sound of someone chewing slowly across the room. It makes you gentler with yourself too. You rest more. You wrap yourself in blankets that smell like onions and coal and old hands. You hum softly. You forgive your body for its aches. You thank it for trying. There's a quiet dignity in the way a mother wipes her child's mouth after a too small meal, as if it had been a feast There's strength in the way a man offers his last piece of bread with a shrug, pretending he doesn't want it. There's beauty in restraint, in grace, in the hollow belly that holds so much more than emptiness. And still, you dream of food, not grand things. Just warm things. A stew thick enough to leave traces on the bowl. A loaf that steams when torn. An apple with more sweetness than bruises. And when, on rare days, you find something special, you don't eat it fast. You don't hoard it. You hold it. You smell it. You break it in half and hand it to someone else. Because hunger, real hunger, doesn't make you greedy. It makes you careful. It makes you tender. It makes you human. And that brings us to a warmth not earned alone, but borrowed. To the comfort, found not in things, but in others. To the heat that came from the stove next door. Some nights, the walls felt thinner than paper. Not because you could see through them, but because you could feel through them. Warmth traveled in silence. And sometimes, that was the only way it came. In homes where fires had long since gone out, people learned to listen for heat, to feel it humming through bricks from the room beside, to trace it with bare fingers like reading Braille in the night. Not theirs, not earned, but near. A neighbor's stove became an anchor, a lifeline, not lit for you, but not hidden either. You'd press your palm to the shared wall, and though it didn't burn, it breathed. A quiet thrum, a pulse beneath plaster, proof that someone nearby had found enough coal to fight the cold. And that was comfort. You learned to time things, to bake when they did, so your oven caught the residual heat, to boil water at midday when the sun and the stove together made it possible. Sometimes you spoke through the wall, not words, just rhythms, the clang of pans, the scrape of boots, the lullaby of spoons tapping ceramic. An entire city whispered to itself like this. People not speaking to one another, but still listening. The poorest homes shared not just sounds, but systems. Holes poked near ceiling corners, so steam could rise from one pot to another. Stoves placed back to back, so the fire could bless 2 rooms instead of 1. A borrowed ember was a gift. Not asked for, just offered. You'd see it wrapped in cloth, passed down stairwells like a newborn, from one flat to another, each person shielding it from the draft, knowing it might be the only flame to last the night. Sometimes it wasn't a stove. Sometimes it was a body. People sleeping in shifts, side by side, passing warmth between them like breath. Not intimacy, survival. Coats layered over coats, wool socks shared like treasure, old newspapers tucked into bed frames, chimneys smoked. In sequence, one home warming, then resting, while another took its turn. You learned the sound of a fire just lit, the crackle, the soft complaint of damp coal, the sigh of air turning warm. It became music, not for joy, but for relief. Didn't knock, didn't intrude. You simply moved closer to the wall. A family you'd never met, living 2 floors away, might be the reason your toes didn't freeze that night. And in return, you might hum as you boiled your kettle, just loud enough for them to know they weren't alone. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below and subscribe if you'd like more nights like this. There was something poetic about that kind of giving. The giving that didn't ask, that didn't owe, just warmth. In all its quiet forms, a coal left on a doorstep, a curtain hung between rooms to stop the draft, a crack stuffed with rags to keep the chill from spreading. People found heat in each, others' habits. A woman who always lit her stove at 4, and by 5, the building was warmer. A man who fixed chimneys for free, because every working flue meant fewer shivers down the block. Sometimes you'd open your window just a crack and feel the heat rise from the tenement next door, like steam from shared tea. It smelled of onions, of coal, of sweat. But it was comfort. The scent of survival. You never thanked anyone directly. That wasn't how it worked. You just nodded, or smiled, or left a crust of bread on the stairwell. A trade of kindness for heat, when the fires burned. People gathered in kitchens, because the bedroom walls were too wide, too far from the flame. They'd eat together, even if not speaking, knees touching, hands close, the warmth moving from body to body, like passing a secret in plain sight. And even when the stove grew cold, something stayed. Something lingered in the way the walls remembered warmth. How the floor kept heat longer than it should have. How the beds felt less cruel when placed near another sleeping body. In London, heat was rarely owned. It was held, borrowed, shared like bread and silence. You didn't need a fireplace to be warm. You needed people. Walls that remembered. Rooms that leaned toward each other. And on the coldest nights, when your own fire wouldn't catch, when the wind moaned through the window cracks like a ghost, you'd press your hand to the plaster and feel them there, not beside you, but near enough. And that brings us to what happens when even that warmth fails. When the roof cries, when the walls sigh, when the drip, drip, drip writes lullabies you never asked for. To rain. In the rafters. It always began with a sound, soft, measured. A single drop finding wood, then another, then a rhythm. Rain in London wasn't rare, but rain inside was personal. It came not with storms or fury, but with quiet insistence. A leak that wasn't there yesterday. Or perhaps it was, and you only just noticed. Drip, drip, from a crack in the rafter, from a place too high to reach, from a roof patched too many times with cloth and hope. You'd lie still in bed, staring at the dark above, watching the black glisten where the moon should have been. Sometimes the water missed the bowl entirely, falling instead onto a coat, a blanket, a forehead, cold and rude, but never unexpected. So you'd shift, not away from the rain, just enough to avoid the next drop. It was a game of sorts, one you never wanted to play, but always lost. Buckets were placed like offerings, one beneath the beam, another near the stove. Old pots, dented pans, even boots with split soles. Each one caught something, each one filled slowly. Sometimes the sound was comforting, a lullaby of water and time. Sometimes it wasn't. You could measure the night by it. Drip, drip, drip. You'd wake when the rhythm changed, when it hit cloth instead of tin, when it spilled, when the puddle reached your shoes. The rain wasn't cruel. It didn't break windows or flood stairwells. It just entered, like a relative with no sense of boundaries. Like sorrow. Like London itself. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video, and consider subscribing only if it feels right. Walls wept. That's what people sighed. Not from sadness, but from soaking. Brick that could no longer hold its burden. Plaster that bubbled like old porridge. You'd press your palm to it and feel it breathe, damp and cold. Some patched holes with rags. Some used wax paper or strips of sack. Some lit candles beneath the leak, as if fire could teach water how to behave. It never worked. But it gave you something to do. There were nights you sat up just to move the bowl when it filled. Careful not to spill it on the blanket. Careful not to wake the child. Careful not to curse, because cursing never helped. And there was always another bowl, another drop, another room where the ceiling gave up just a little more. Daylight made it worse, because you could see then the trail the water left behind, the stain growing like a shadow you hadn't invited. You'd wipe it, dry it, pretend it would stop. And then night returned, and so did the rain. Some slept through it. Most didn't. Sleep came only in parts, in pockets of warmth, between drips. But there were still kindnesses. Someone might lend you oilcloth. Someone else might trade for wax. A neighbor might place their own pot just outside your door, catching what might have reached you. And when the rain did stop, you could almost hear the city exhale. A silence not from peace, but from pause. You'd empty the buckets with care, pouring them out into the street like old memories. Sometimes you'd watch the steam rise from the stove as the last of the damp dried from your sleeves. It never fully left. The smell of wet, the feel of it in your bones. But even that became a kind of closeness. A bond between you and the building, between you and the night. Because when you live beneath a roof that cries, you learn to love it gently. To whisper to thank it for holding, to forgive it for failing. And to wrap your blanket tighter, press your back to the warmest wall, and fall asleep anyway. Because sleep is stubborn. And people, even soggy and shivering, are too. And that brings us to something more surprising, something tender, something rare. To the warmth of love. Even in the smallest, poorest room. There was barely space to breathe. A bed that creaked like an old ship. A window that didn't open or didn't close, depending on the season. A curtain hung for privacy, though no one pretended it worked. One room, one door, two people. And still, there was room for love. Not the love from books. Not sonnets or candlelit glances. This love smelled of boiled cabbage and singed wool. It wore mismatched socks. It shared one cup of tea and passed it back and forth without comment. It didn't come with roses. It came with an extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed, with water warmed in the same kettle you used to wash your feet, with knowing which floorboard squeaked and stepping over it in the dark. Some found it by accident. Two strangers, placed by chance in adjoining bunks, hearing the same rats, coughing in chorus, until one night a hand reached out, not for lust, not even for warmth, but just to be held. And it stayed. The hand, the presence, the breath beside you. Was quiet. This kind of love. It didn't announce itself. It didn't ask for names, sometimes not even for words. It just sat there, wrapped in old quilts and understanding. She might brush his collar before he left. He might leave a crust of bread near her pillow. Neither would say thank you. Not out of ingratitude, but because the gesture was enough. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below and subscribe if you'd like more nights like this. There were no proposals, no weddings, sometimes no promises. Just moments, strung together like laundry between buildings, fluttering quietly, barely noticed by those below. And yet, powerful. You'd see it sometimes on the street. A woman carrying two cups instead of one. A man waiting at the edge of the market, not to shop, but to walk her home. A shared scarf. A shared silence. A shared laugh in a place where laughter was. Rare. They made a life between shifts. Between meals that weren't meals. Between rooms that weren't theirs. They borrowed time like they borrowed heat. Gratefully, temporarily, carefully. Even jealousy looked different here. Not rage, not suspicion. Just the small ache of watching a smile given to someone else. And forgiveness, too, came easier. Because when you have so little, you learn to protect what joy you do have. Love in a rented room wasn't about forever. It was about tonight. About who held you when the ceiling leaked. About who knew the shape of your cough. About who shared the second spoonful when there wasn't supposed to be one. Some had children. Some didn't. Some wanted them. Some mourned them. But all of them knew what it meant to choose someone, even when nothing else felt like a choice. Arguments happened. Of course they did. About tea gone cold. About coal run out. About boots wet and left too close to the sheets. But still, they stayed. because staying was an act of love. There were moments. Brief. Beautiful. A laugh at something. Silly. A touch under the blanket when no one was looking. The way she hummed while folding laundry. The way he listened without pretending to fix anything. And there were memories. A first kiss beneath dripping gutters. A candle lit just because. A tin. Plate washed before the other returned. These things mattered, even if no one else saw them. Even if the world called it survival instead of romance. Even if the room was borrowed. The love inside, it was not it belonged to them. Fully, quietly, completely. And when, eventually, one had to leave. For work, for war, for other reasons. Too heavy to speak aloud, they folded what they had. Gently, carefully, like linens. Like memory. And they carried it with them. Because love, once held in a rented room, never truly leaves. It lingers in the wood. In the smell of shared soap. In the dent in the pillow. In the silence after the door clicks shut. And that brings us to another kind of silence. Not romantic. Not chosen. But the silence left behind by grief too. Heavy to name. Some rooms are too quiet. Not because no one's there, but because someone was. A cradle sits by the fire, rocked only by the drafts now. Its blanket remains folded, a shape, still pressed into its center. As if the child might return at any moment, but they won't. In Victorian London, infant death was a whisper, common, constant, and devastating. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't written down, not always. It was wrapped, carried, buried, and lived with forever. The mother doesn't cry right away. She moves through the routine as if nothing's changed. Boils water, washes cloth, sweeps the floor beneath the cot, not because she's fine, but because stopping would let it in. The grief, and grief, once invited, never leaves quickly. The child had been sick, or hadn't, or had simply gone quiet in the night, curled like a comma beside her. She had woken before the light, as always, and known, from the stillness, there's a kind of silence that speaks. She dressed the body slowly, gently, cleaned what didn't need cleaning, braided the hair, or buttoned the shirt, or folded the hands. Then she wrapped the child in the blanket they always kicked off at night. She didn't scream. She didn't call for anyone. She just waited, holding, rocking, breathing in rhythm with someone no longer breathing back. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. Later, there were steps. A knock. A neighbor with eyes lowered. She nodded. That was enough. The burial was fast. It had to be. There were fees. There were forms. There were rules about what was allowed and what was not. Some children were buried in shared graves. Small bundles placed carefully beside strangers. Some mothers walked home empty-handed. Others carried shoes in their pockets. A lock of hair. A name whispered into their palm. Not all children had names, but every mother had a lullaby they couldn't finish anymore. Grief settled into her shoulders, made her quiet in ways no hunger ever had. She still worked, still moved, still smiled when she had to, but she carried something invisible now, the memory of weight in her arms, the echo of tiny fingers curling around hers, the cry she swore she could still hear in the middle of the night. Other mothers noticed. They didn't speak. They just gave her more space by the pump, offered bread without asking, folded her washing. If she left it too long, there was a code, an understanding passed in glances, in quiet nods, in shared silence near a stove. Loss wasn't rare. It was stitched into the fabric of life, but it never hurt less. Some mothers had lost 2, 3, more, and still they got up. Still they lit fires. Still they mended clothes for children who would grow too fast or not at all. Because that's what love did. It kept going, even with empty arms. Sometimes, in the street, she'd see a child the same age, and something would catch in her throat. Not envy, not even sorrow, just memory, a flicker of what might have been. She'd look away to the moments stolen in stairwells, behind doors, beneath blankets. To the stolen silence. Silence had to be stolen. Was not offered freely. Not in a city built of footsteps and chimneys and carts on cobblestone. Not where babies cried and boots dragged and neighbors shouted through walls thin as paper. If you wanted silence in Victorian London, you had to find it, create it, guard it. And sometimes take it from somewhere it didn't belong. There was no such thing as a quiet house. Not really. Not when 10 people shared 4 rooms, when someone was always stirring porridge, or coughing, or fixing a hem with a needle that clicked against a thimble. So people got creative. They found silence in stairwells, between the second and third floor, where no one stopped, where the air was cold and still and thick with forgotten footsteps. A boy might sit there with his head in his hands, not crying, just not moving, just letting the noise pass by above and below. A woman might pause with a basket of laundry, holding it a moment longer than needed, eyes closed, savoring the weight of nothing. The rooftop was good too, if you could reach it, not for the view, just for the hush. The kind of silence that came with distance, when even the dogs sounded far away. Sometimes you'd catch someone there, not working, not watching, just breathing. They wouldn't speak, and neither would you, because the best kind of silence is shared without being broken. There were other places. Corners behind hanging laundry, under the stairs, by the warm stove after everyone else had gone to bed. Places where the noise softened, became background, became permission. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below, and subscribe if you'd like more nights like this. Mothers found it in moments. When the baby finally slept, when the kettle boiled, and no one asked for anything for the first time all day. They'd lean against the wall, eyes half closed, hands still wet, and listen to the nothing. It didn't last. It never did. But it was enough. Men found it in the slow scraping of a blade against leather, in the time between candle and darkness, in the ache of muscles finally let go. Even the rats knew to move softly in these silences. Even the wind knew not to knock. You couldn't buy quiet. Not in this part of the city. But you could barter for it. You could trade a chore. Stand guard while someone closed their eyes. Take the baby outside so a mother could sit still. That was love here. That was care. Not words. Not gifts. But silence, handed gently. Like a bowl of hot water in winter. Some people talk too much. Not out of rudeness, but fear. Fear that silence meant sadness. That it would open the door to something heavy. But others understood. Silence was not emptiness. It was rest. It was room. There was a girl who sat under the table. Not hiding. Just still. She'd trace the cracks in the wood above her and listen to the footsteps around her like music. And when someone finally noticed she was gone, she'd come back smiling. Not because she was happy, but because she'd had a moment to remember how to be. Even in the factories, even in the noise, there were pockets of quiet. A breath held too long. A machine stalled. A look exchanged across a belt. Sometimes that was all you needed. 1 minute where no one was talking. No one was yelling. No one was asking. Just a pause. And the sound of your own breath returning to you. Silence had its own scent. Dust. Wool. Cool air where breath slowed and thought softened. It had a weight. The kind that pressed gently on your shoulders, but never hurt. The kind that said, "You're here. You're safe. Just for now." And sometimes That was enough to keep going. Because you knew, somewhere in the city, beneath the shouting and scraping and spitting and soot, there was a quiet place. And if you were lucky, it was waiting for you, so you stole it when you could, guarded it when you had it, and shared it when you had someone worth sharing it with, And that brings us to the one thing that covered everything. The dust that settled on your windows, your lungs, your clothes. The softness of coal dust. Coal dust was everywhere, not just in the air, but in the folds of your clothes, the corners of your mouth, the cracks in your skin. It didn't fall with force. It drifted, settled, like snow that never melted. It came in through windows, through keyholes, through the very pores of the buildings. You could wipe a windowsill clean, and by morning it would wear a thin, dark veil again. You breathed it in before you even knew to hold your breath. It lined your nostrils, turned your handkerchiefs gray, lingered in the butter even when covered. But somehow it became part of life. Not an intruder, but a companion. Because coal was warmth. Coal was soup. Coal was light in the morning, and heat in the kettle. And the dust was proof of that. You didn't curse it. Not really. You swept it. You slapped it from your sleeves. You shook it from your blankets before bed, and lay down in a bed still holding more. Children played in it, not because it was safe, but because it was there. They drew pictures in it on the floor, tracked it across clean rugs, got scolded, and did it again. It turned nails dark. It made hands look older, but it also meant the stove had been fed, that someone had carried the bucket, that someone had traded for a sack. The coalman came like clockwork, a figure carved in soot, bent, booted, barely blinking. He spoke little, grunted more, but he was as familiar as family. And he brought the one thing everyone needed, even if they couldn't quite afford it. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. You heard him before you saw him. The rattle of wheels, the thump of sack on stone, the soft cough as he lifted the weight too quickly. Children watched him like a magician, turning black lumps into light, into breakfast, into breath that no longer steamed in the morning. And when he left, the dust remained. You tried to keep it out. You stuffed rags under doors. You washed the curtains. You polished the mantel. But still, it came. On shoes, on sleeves, on every draft that followed the flame. Eventually, you stopped trying to banish it. You swept it with love. You used it to darken cloth when dye was gone. You let it season your soup when it floated in unnoticed. It had weight, yes, but also softness. It coated the rough edges of the city. It made everything look the same. The rich man's stoop, the poor man's roof. It was the great equalizer. In time, people stopped seeing it until they moved, or scrubbed too deeply, or found it beneath their fingernails at a funeral. Then they remembered that it was always there, that it had lived with them, that it had become them. Some even missed it when it was gone. The newer homes had gas lines, pipes that hissed instead of stoves that roared, clean walls, clean air. But no scent, no soot. No proof that fire had lived there. And maybe that's why some still kept coal grates, unused, but remembered. Because the dust meant something. It meant struggle, yes, but also survival. It meant a room had been warm once, even if just for an hour, even if just on a holiday, even if just for the child curled up closest to the hearth. There's a softness in things that stay, and coal dust stayed, on lace collars, on floorboards, on the pages of books no one read anymore. And when someone sat down on a stool, left a perfect black mark on the hem of their dress and didn't brush it away. You knew. They remembered. They knew what it was to light a fire for nothing, to fan it with cracked hands, to hold it like a secret, and to sleep beside its warmth, knowing the dust would come, and knowing they were okay with that dot, because coal dust was proof that something had burned. That something had warmed them. That something had worked dot, and that brings us to something else, passed from stranger to stranger. Not fire, not food dot, but kindness dot, the kind of quiet kindness that holds up the world when no one is watching. Kindness didn't wear ribbons in Victorian London. It didn't announce itself or wait for applause. It simply happened, quietly, when no one was looking, and especially when someone needed it most. The city was not kind, not in the way warm towns and summer fields might be. But even here, in the soot and steam, the crowd and cold, people found ways to be gentle, Dot, not because they had much, but because they understood what it meant to have nothing. A loaf of bread was torn in half, not offered proudly, just passed without eye contact. A scarf was left draped over a railing, not forgotten, but placed, left for whoever needed it more. A woman at the pump filled 2 buckets instead of 1. She didn't ask whose it was. She just set it down by the stoop and walked away. Dot. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was survival. Shared. Dot. In the queue for coal, someone might step back, let an old man go first. No words. No nod. Just a shuffle of boots to say, "Go on, it's your turn." Children handed scraps of newspaper to strangers with wet shoes, held babies while their mothers caught their breath, helped tie a knot, carry a sack, shoo away a dog. They didn't think of it as kindness. They just thought of it as right. Kindness here had a shape, rough around the edges, but solid. If you're enjoying this pace already, leave a soft like below and subscribe if you'd like more nights like this. There was a woman who stitched buttons for neighbors she barely knew. She did it in silence, her fingers fast and tired. No one paid her. They just left things by her door and picked them up again 2 days later. No one thanked her. No one needed to. She'd once lost a child, and kindness had kept her upright. So now she gave it back. A boy shared his last boiled sweet with a crying girl at the market. He didn't smile, didn't tease, just unwrapped it and held it out. She took it, and for 1 whole minute she stopped crying. That was enough. In workshops, a man might cover for another, let him sit down without drawing attention, hammer a few extra nails, sweep a bit more floor, because he remembered being hungry. And someone had once done the same for him. Kindness wasn't about big gestures. It was about moments. Brief, soft, true. A hand on the shoulder. A cup of broth passed without asking. A seat saved near the fire. Some people didn't know how to speak their softness, but they knew how to show it. In the way they left the last piece of bread. In the way they stayed awake to make sure the coals didn't go out. In the way they took your hand to cross the street, even if you were grown. There were stories passed quietly, of a landlord who forgave rent in the dead of winter, of a butcher who slipped bones into the baskets of the poor, of a milkmaid who gave the last pour of her pail to a woman with too many mouths to feed. These weren't saints. They were tired and cold and hungry, but still they gave. Not because it made them good, but because it made the world bearable. Kindness didn't fix anything. It didn't bring jobs, or stop the rain, or feed the city, but it gave people a reason to believe the world could be endured. And sometimes that was more important than anything else. You didn't always know who had helped you. A loaf left at your door, a candle already lit, a coat mended while you were asleep, but you remembered the feeling that someone, somewhere, had seen you. And so, when you could, you did the same. You gave what you had. You didn't ask why. You just gave, because maybe they'd do the same for someone else, or maybe not. But it didn't matter. The act was enough. And that brings us to those who didn't sleep when the rest of the city did. Who worked in the hush, in the flicker, in the dark, the night watchers. Most of the city slept, or tried to, behind shutters and under blankets, breathing in rhythm with the rain on rooftops, or not at all. But some stayed awake, not by choice, by need. The night had its own people, its own rhythm, its own kind of labor. The streets were quieter after dark, but not silent. Never silent. They sighed, they whispered, they warmed, and some walked them anyway. The night watchman moved with a lantern. Its light bobbed like a heartbeat. Not bright enough to scare, but just enough to say, "I see you." His coat was long, his gloves torn at the fingers. He leaned slightly left from years of walking with weight. He didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't stop unless someone needed stopping. But every few hours, he rapped his staff on stone. Sound to say, the night is still here, and so am I. Not far behind, the midwife stirred from half-sleep, called out from warmth into weather. She wrapped her shawl tight, picked up her satchel, the one with thread and vinegar and old. Prayers. Birth didn't wait for morning, so neither did she. Her boots were steady, her breath white. She knew the city by the shape of its shadows. Somewhere else, a baker rose early, or stayed up late, depending on how you counted time. His oven warmed before the sun. The dough rose in silence, soft beneath his palm, a promise of something better. And when others still slept, he'd crack open the window just wide enough to let the scent spill out into the waking dark. Sometimes it was a thief who watched. Not for justice, but for a window left ajar, a purse too loose, a door forgotten. But even thieves moved with rhythm. There were rules, even for them. No stealing from the sick, no scaring children, no cruelty, just survival, quietly claimed. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. A woman lit candles in a church no one would enter until morning. Her steps echoed. Her prayers did not. She didn't ask for miracles, only rest for those who couldn't find it. A child with fever, a man with guilt, a mother who hadn't yet cried. The night made listeners of everyone. Even the dogs barked less. Even the rats moved slower. You could hear things you'd missed all day. The settling of beams, the ticking of clocks, the flutter of paper from an open drawer. Some lovers met after midnight, their meetings brief, their touches lighter than breath. Not because they had less love, but because the world was louder in the daylight. The night gave them space. A candle burned in the window for someone who hadn't come home, not for punishment, but for hope. Somewhere, someone practiced violin badly. A child, perhaps, or someone trying to remember who they used to be. And from the rooftops, a chimney sweep lay back against tile and counted stars that London hadn't yet covered with smoke. The night was not safe, but it was honest. It did not lie about its cold. It did not pretend to comfort. It simply was, and those who walked in it understood that there was a kind of peace in knowing you weren't the only one awake. That across bricks and alleys and fog, someone else was out there, watching, moving, waiting for morning. And when the first streak of pale light brushed the rooftops, they didn't cheer, they didn't smile, they just nodded. To the sky, to the street, to the night. And they turned toward home. Because morning meant warmth, meant bread, meant the sound of others waking, and they had earned their rest. And that brings us to what the night left behind, on windowsills, on fingers, on frozen breath. The blankets. And the blizzard's winter in London wasn't kind. It didn't come, roaring in with ice and thunder. It crept, slow, wet, and bone-deep. It began with frost on the panes, then the tap that wouldn't drip, then breath seen in the hallway, then blankets pulled tighter, and fires lit sooner than they could afford. To be, the poor knew the cold better than anyone. Not in theory, in skin. And blankets were survival. Not quilts or comforters, but coats sewn shut, shawls layered over sacks, a patchwork of anything soft enough to hold breath beneath it. Old clothes became cover. Newspaper became insulation. Wool was gold. Even when it scratched, people stuffed rags in windows, taped seams with wax paper, stuffed gaps in the door with straw or cotton, if they could find it. And still the wind found a way in, through the slats, through the brick, through memory itself. Some slept in pairs, some in piles, not from affection, from necessity. Backs against backs, knees tucked in, arms folded beneath ribs to keep the heat from leaving too quickly. Mothers wrapped their children. Like gifts, feet to chest, head to belly. They breathed together in rhythm, as if by sharing breath, they could trick the cold into staying out. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only. If it feels right. Sometimes it snowed. Not like postcards. Not gentle flakes dancing in gaslight. It fell heavy. Wet. It turned alleys to slush. Cobblestones to traps. It soaked through soles and froze them from the inside. And then it stopped. Just long enough to freeze solid again. And London became glass. Cracked, sharp, unforgiving. The city did not slow for snow. The carts rolled on. The factories stayed hot. The bells still rang, but feet moved slower. Hunched bodies bent lower. And people lit fires not for warmth, but for courage. There was no such thing as too many blankets. Only not enough. A kind neighbor might lend one, but always with the promise it'd be returned. Not because they didn't care, because they couldn't spare another. Blankets were currency. They bought sleep and stillness, and sometimes silence. There were stories of people freezing in their chairs, too tired to make it to bed, too proud to ask for more coal, too used to pain to notice when their toes had stopped feeling. A thin man once wore every coat he owned. He looked like a walking wardrobe, but he smiled anyway, because he hadn't shivered that day. Children played in the snow, briefly, before it soaked through mittens and stung their ears. They made snowballs out of soot, laughed until their teeth chattered, then rushed home to warm by the stove that didn't burn brightly, but still burned. Even the dogs knew how to tuck themselves under porches, curling nose to tail like commas. And the cats, they found the laps of the kind. The cold was cruel, but it made people softer. They held doors longer, shared tea more often, walked slower so others could catch up. A blanket wasn't just cloth. It was protection. It was peace. It was a promise you'd made it through another night. People passed them down like names. This one belonged to your brother. This. One saw the frost of 56. This one saved your father's legs. They weren't warm by nature. And on the coldest nights, when the wind howled like grief, when the frost bit through cracks no one could seal, when the fire sputtered and begged for more, you'd wrap that blanket tight around your shoulders, tuck it under your chin, and hum. Not a song. Not really. Just something soft. Something yours. Because if you could feel your own voice against your ribs, you were still alive. And that was everything. And so, when the sun finally returned, when the frost cracked and fell like broken glass, when people peeled blankets off their shoulders and stepped into the light, they didn't cheer. They just blinked. And nodded. And said, "We made it." And that brings us to the final ritual of every day. The only thing truly yours, no matter what you'd lost. The quiet, familiar ritual of sleep. Sleep had to be earned not with yawns, not with bedtime stories, but with a day survived. In Victorian London, the ritual of sleep wasn't a luxury. It was a practice, a method, a quiet routine that began long before the body still. It started with the stove. However faint its fire had grown, however few coals remained, someone always stirred it, even if it only glowed, even if it didn't warm the room. It warmed the idea of rest. You'd hang a kettle over it, not for tea that came earlier, but for sound, a soft hiss, a burble, a signal to the walls that night had begun. Boots were pulled off slowly, with a grunt or a sigh. Set near the fire, solace up, not to dry, that rarely happened, but to feel a little less cold in the air. Morning. Socks, if you had them, were rubbed together. Wool against wool. A poor man's furnace. The basin was filled with water, cold or slightly less cold, and you washed just the hands, the face, sometimes the feet if they ached enough to warrant it, not because anyone would see, not because it mattered, but because it marked the line. Day ended here. Night begins now. Blankets were unfolded like maps, layered with care. A coat, a shawl, an extra curtain hung down from the rafters. Pillows were not soft, but they held your head all the same, stuffed with straw or rags or scraps of something long ago luxurious. Sometimes you slept alone. More often you did not. Children pressed against parents. Strangers sharing the same room slept back to back. Couples turned inward. When cold, outward when dreaming. Sleep was not private, but it was precious. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. Before closing their eyes, some whispered a prayer. Not long, just enough. Thank you. Let me wake. Let them rest. Words softened by breath, lost in the dark. Others hummed. Not lullabies, not always. Just notes. A melody without meaning, except the body understood it. They were superstitions. Don't sleep with your feet toward the door. Don't whistle before bed. Don't dream of water. But most people were too tired for omens. They just lay down. Let go. The city didn't quiet when they did. It creaked. It rattled. It breathed. But inside the room, beneath all that noise, there was stillness. A child turned in sleep, murmured something about bread. A man exhaled slowly, as if releasing all the weight from his shoulders in one breath. There was comfort in routine. The same blanket, the same scratchy mattress, the same drip from the ceiling you'd learned to sleep through. You'd wake in the eye. Middle of the night, not from fear, from habit, from cold, from the sound of someone shifting, and you'd pull the blanket higher, tuck your knees, press your hands between your thighs, and sleep again. Dreams were not grand. They weren't dreams of escape. They were dreams of warmth, of holding something warm in your hands and knowing it was yours, of fires that didn't go out, of bread still hot from the oven, of walking barefoot without pain. And when the first light slipped through the cracks, or the rooster crowed, or the upstairs neighbor stomped awake, the ritual reversed. Blankets folded, boots thunked. The kettle refilled. No one spoke much. There was no need. Sleep had done its job, not to restore, but to carry. And that was enough, because in a city that never rested, where nothing was ever truly clean or truly safe, to sleep at all was an act of faith, a belief in tomorrow, a belief in warmth, a belief in waking. And that brings us to the last sound you hear before sleep, the one that reminds you, you are still here, you are still breathing, you are still trying. The kettle's whistle. It didn't always whistle. Sometimes it sputtered. Sometimes it hissed like a tired snake. Sometimes the steam just escaped in silence. But when the kettle sang, truly sang, something inside the room lifted, not a song made of metal and heat, of timing, of patience, of the quiet miracle that water, given enough fire, will sing for you. It was never loud, not in the way you'd expect, not like bells or laughter, just a rising hum, soft at first, then stronger until it filled the air, like breath made audible. And for those few moments, you paused. It didn't matter what you were doing. The body turned toward it. The hand reached for the cloth. The mind, weary and frayed, softened slightly, as if soothed by the idea that something so simple could still go right. You see, the kettle didn't just mean tea. It meant heat. It meant a small victory. It meant someone had found coal, had struck a match, had waited, patiently, hopefully for this sound. It meant the day had not taken everything. People waited for it like prayer. It wasn't the drink that comforted them. It was the process. Fill the kettle. Place it on the stove. Watch the flame catch. Watch it struggle. Watch it take. And then wait. A kettle asked nothing of you. Only that you stay near. Only that you believe it will sing when it's ready. In some homes, the kettle was the only thing that made noise. The only sound not made by hardship. It was a domestic symphony. A pop of fire, the creak of the stove, and that clear, rising note. Sharp as memory. Soft as breath. If you're still settling in, maybe leave a quiet like on this video and consider subscribing only if it feels right. Children knew the sound. It meant they could come closer. That something warm was coming. Not a feast, but enough. They'd sit cross-legged on the floor, eyes watching the cup as if it might refill itself. Hands wrapped around the tin, not to drink, just to hold. Sometimes there was sugar, often not. Sometimes milk, if rationing had been kind. Mostly not, but always. Warmth, always steam rising like a ribbon from chipped mugs. Adults drank slower. Less from manners, more from awareness. They knew this was the only heat they'd feel for hours. So they sipped, carefully, gratefully. Some added scraps of peel, a dash of salt, a clove tucked away from Christmas. Little things, tiny rebellions. Too. Turn water into comfort. The kettle became a clock. Boiled for breakfast. Boiled before bed. Boiled when someone came to the door with bad news. It soothed. Even when the news did not. And in moments of silence, between sobs, between prayers, between footsteps leaving the room, the kettle's whistle filled the space where words didn't fit. People gifted kettles at weddings, at funerals, to new mothers, to old neighbors moving into colder flats. It wasn't the object. It was what it promised, that no matter what, you could always find a way to boil water, to make something warm, to share it. There were homes where the kettle never stopped, passed from room to room, cup to cup, hands shaking but steady. A neighbor might knock, not to ask, just to stand near the stove, and the kettle would sing for both of you. No need to talk, no need to explain. You just sip together and listen. Sometimes the song would end too soon. The flame would die. The kettle would rattle and fall quiet, but the silence after was different. Fuller, kinder, because it had been there, and it would be there again. Even the poorest homes had one. Even if broken, even if borrowed, even if it took an hour to boil. Because when the kettle sang, the world felt possible. It meant something had worked. Something had transformed. Something inside that rusted belly had fought to become more. And it did. And it sang. And that brings us to what never quite slept in London. What whispered through rafters, rattled windows, creaked through floors. The city itself, always breathing. Never silent, Even in sleep, London murmured that, not the kind of silence you read about in poems, not peaceful or still, but the silence of things always on the edge of motion, of lives still turning just out of sight. The city did not rest. It creaked, it moaned, it sighed through the wood and whispered beneath the windows. Some sounds you expected, a cart rolling past too late, a dog barking twice and no more. The echo of boots in an alley too narrow for sun. Others came softly, without warning. The settling of beams, a cough through the wall, a laugh from a pub down the street, half muted by brick and smoke. Even the wind had its own language, not a howl, but a whisper. Through slats in the floor, across gaps in the chimney, curling up through keyholes and under doors, like breath from a ghost. In some rooms, the fire still flickered. Not from fuel, but memory. Just enough to cast a faint orange shimmer on the ceiling. Just enough to see the outline of a hand, reaching for sleep. You never heard the whole city at once. Just fragments. The groan of a stair. The drip of a pipe. The sudden clatter of something falling 3 floors away. You'd hold your breath, listen, and release it when nothing followed. No danger. Just London, stretching its limbs. Even in sleep, it never quite stopped. In the tenements, dreams were shallow. Light flickered even with eyes closed. Children mumbled words they'd never say aloud while awake. Mothers woke every hour to adjust. A blanket to check for breath. Someone coughed. Someone snored. Someone hummed to themselves without realizing it. And still, the city moved. If you stepped outside, barefoot maybe, you'd find it waiting for you. The fog clinging low. The lamp posts glowing like old secrets. The cobblestones slick with mist, the gutters whispering water. A cat darted past. A rat scurried under the cart. A man leaned on a railing, smoking nothing, just holding the shape of it in his fingers. The bells didn't chime after midnight. Not officially, but the city had other clocks. A baby crying. A man stumbling home. The sound of shutters closing. Late and careful. You could feel the pulse of it, beneath your bare feet, in the walls in your chest. This place was never quiet, but it was never cruel either. Just full. Always full of lives overlapping. Of moments stacked like bricks. Of sleep that came not as rest, but as a pause. There were no lullabies, except maybe the steady drip from the eaves, or the flutter of laundry still hanging in the night wind. No one sang to you. But the city murmured in its own way. You're still here. You're still breathing. You've made it. You might lie awake for hours, watching shadows stretch and shrink, counting each creak, naming each sound like old friends. And eventually, without knowing when, you'd drift. Not because the city grew silent, but because it kept whispering. And you trusted it to go on without you. That's how sleep worked here. Not in spite of noise. Because of it. Because the world didn't stop turning. And somehow, that made it safe to rest. And that brings us to the very end. To the part of the story that never makes it into records. The part told not in facts, but in feeling. The warmth we carried. In the end. It wasn't the cold that defined them. Not the soot, or the hunger, or the silence between drips. It was the warmth they carried. Small, stubborn, and impossibly. Bright. Not the warmth of grand hearths or velvet beds, but the kind found in cupped hands, in borrowed blankets, in the steam that rose from tin cups passed hand to hand. The kind of warmth that didn't burn, but stayed, because in a city that asked so much, people learned to give what they could. A glance, a loaf, a patch for a stranger's coat. A song sung softly after someone had stopped crying. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was its own kind of fire. Mothers wrapped their children not just in wool, but in stories. Fathers returned with tired bones and hands stained black, but always made time to light the kettle. Even in grief, someone lit the stove. Even in hunger, someone shared a crust. Even in loss, someone whispered, "Sleep now. I'll watch." They didn't write this warmth down. It's not in the books, not in the museums, but it lived in the walls, and in each other. It moved through the city like breath, soft, invisible, essential. You see, survival wasn't loud. It didn't shout its victories. It just continued quietly, again and again. A pair of socks, mended one more time. A window stuffed just tight enough to keep the frost from biting. A child turned in their sleep, and a hand gently pulled the blanket back up. That was warmth. Not comfort. Not plenty. Just care. And it mattered. It mattered. More than anyone ever said aloud. Even the poorest homes found space for it. A fire made from twigs and pages of old books. A seat offered near the warmth, even if it meant someone else sat cold. There were no medals for kindness here, no statues for sacrifice. But the warmth stayed. It stayed in the way people remembered each other's coughs, in the way someone knocked twice instead of once, so the neighbor would know it was a friend. In the way someone kept a candle lit in the window, just in case. They wore their care like ash, in the memory of warmth passed down from stranger to stranger, from mother to daughter, from worker to child. A warmth that said, "You matter. You are seen. You don't have to be alone tonight." And if you listen closely, beneath the cobblestones, beyond the chimneys, through the soot and silence, you can still hear it, still feel it. The echo of hands near a stove, the creak of a bed under shared weight, the slow hush of water heating over a flame too small to notice. And maybe, in some forgotten room, someone still wrapping old coats around the windows, still lighting a kettle in the dark. Not because it's easy, but because that's what people do. They make warmth, wherever they are, even here, even now, even still.